Hello, welcome to the Distribution and Media Power Hour. My name is Marcella Walsh, Live Content Coordinator at AVIXA. Today we'll be discussing media content security, where we learn to identify potential security vulnerabilities. Before we begin the discussion, please note the following. If you're viewing live today, you will receive one CTS, CTSD, or CTSI RU credit. Credits will appear on your transcript within 5 to 7 business days. For any issues, please email webinars@avixa.org. The webinar will be approximately 45 to 60 minutes, and all attendees will be placed on mute. Click the speech bubble icon to open the event chat, where you can communicate with all attendees and the panelists. Please introduce yourself and let us know where you are logging in from today and what topics you would like to see in future power hours. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A window so that the moderator can address them at the end of the webinar. To access the Q&A window, simply move your cursor to the bottom of your live stream video box to locate the Q&A icon and click to open. Please enter your questions into the Q&A window only, not the chat window. You will have access to this recorded webinar at avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days. You can also access other content distribution and media power hour webinars at the same link. Our content distribution and media power hour moderator is Deborah Jones, AVIT sales manager for the Queen Elizabeth II Center. Deborah is responsible for planning and managing the technical aspects of the center's client portfolio. Previously, she worked for the commercial arm of a charity organization, the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, where she established an events unit organizing conferences, selling exhibition space, seminars, awards ceremonies, and gala dinners, and ran their publications, commissioning, editing, publishing, and selling their book list. And now I will hand things over to Deborah.
Hello, welcome. We're going to be talking in this Media Power Hour about media content security. I've got a host of great speakers lined up. I'm going to introduce them now. The first is Jamie Horner. As a vendor, he's the Managing Director of Highcliffe Technologies, based in Ontario, Canada, and provides cybersecurity solutions to the AV industry. He's got over 20 years of experience working in the cyber technology security sector, and he's worked in media, entertainment, and networking industries. Then there's Benedict Odo. He's the AV IT specialist for Experian for the customer innovation project there, and I know him through the London AV user group, a community of AV end users. Benedict has traversed the corporate education and live events sector as a systems integrator, project manager, and commissioning engineer. And currently he's the AV IT specialist for Experian customer innovation and for the world's first immersive customer innovation experience for data information solutions in the City of London. We have Matthew Slack. He's the lead infrastructure engineer at CIBC, the Canadian banking community. Matthew has had a variety of roles in higher education, live events, enterprise, and government, and his passion is delivering centralized, IT-centric, secure, and scalable audiovisual solutions and managed services. And I think that's a great shopping list. And finally, we've got Mike White, and he has so many qualifications that we actually don't have a whole hour to read them out in. He's a digital signage expert from Solutions Inc. He served on the Infocom International Board of Directors and Digital Signage Expo's Board of Directors, and he's a distinguished speaker at Infocom and at the Digital Signage Expo, as well as being a published author of over 100 articles. And without more ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jamie. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, Deborah. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, thank you for everybody for joining. Again, my name is Jamie Horner. I'm the Managing Director of Highcliffe Technologies, and we're a technology company, and we're focusing on the gaps in cybersecurity as they apply to AV environments. So I wanted to take the opportunity during the session to discuss some of the trends and influences we're seeing in the AV industry and how they pertain to the importance or the criticality of cybersecurity. I think we're seeing more and more cybersecurity or cyber events in the news, and certainly it's becoming a very important topic. Unfortunately, I think it's one where in AV environments up till now hasn't been maybe thoroughly addressed. A lot of AV environments maybe don't see the same level of cybersecurity scrutiny or kind of looking for these types of gaps or vulnerabilities that maybe other parts of the enterprises are seeing. So I wanted to sort of walk through some of that in this session. So one of the trends that we're seeing quite rapidly due to the pandemic is a shift to hybrid workspaces or hybrid classrooms, and this is where organizations, of course, are working both remotely, and now some organizations are welcoming people back to their offices. So, certainly the importance of collaboration technology is increased. And I think there's a shuffle happening in that a lot of the spaces are being reorganized. Certainly spaces and rooms that maybe had higher levels of occupancy capabilities are being altered to or reorganized or relaid out to support maybe smaller sizes. So I think maybe there's definitely an increase in the number of spaces that are being now outfitted in certain organizations. I think the great news, though, here is that certainly that is what our the AV industry is here for, and what what we offer and what our services provide as a community. So we are supporting these businesses and these schools as they're looking to take on the challenge of kind of reorganizing and kind of trying to support this hybrid work model, and certainly plays to the strengths of the AV community, and obviously increasing the importance of the AV community in terms of helping facilitate. So I think one of the other interesting aspects I think we're seeing, or we're going to see certainly within this whole transition, is really creating destinations within the workplace for people to come back and collaborate in. And so, again, the challenges that we've faced in this last, 12 plus months of the pandemic have a lot of people working from home, and obviously for good reason. But, I think that there is a lot of value for people to come back together and work in person, or at least come together to collaborate. I think there's a lot of value in being able to work with your fellow colleagues and share ideas. I think that that's a trend that's missing, certainly when we look about when we talk about online and Zoom meetings and things. I think the happenstance collaborations are important, and I think it's going to be kind of at the forefront of a lot of organizations to make their workspaces or classrooms places or destinations for their employees or students to want to come and participate. So, again, kind of increasing the importance of the AV spaces, and perhaps also increasing the type of technology that's being used to enhance those types of environments. Another aspect that that I think is also going to be a trend is also the increase in the sophistication of the technology that's being deployed within these workspaces and classrooms. I think there's going to be a demand for higher quality, certainly a demand for higher reliability, because of course, with so many participants, both on-prem and remote, a business operation requires that proper communications be able to take place. So I think you're going to see demand for more sophisticated audio equipment, beam finding and technology of that nature, as well as an increase in the types of video capture technology in terms of tracking and cameras, again, to make these collaboration spaces far more immersive and spaces that people are going to want to use. But at the same time, there needs to be a level of trust there as well. So I think certainly now we're going to be having a lot more higher profile conversations and meetings that are going to be presented through this technology, that are going to be on a network. And certainly there are going to be things that are said that are confidential. And, so this is where we start to see, how, this trend is certainly going to add, a new level of importance to the cybersecurity or security of these types of technologies and these environments. Of course, the use of the network is not new. We've seen a trend in at least the last 5 years of more and more of the AV equipment and communication equipment utilizing a network-based topology for delivery of the video, audio, and sensor asset and information and data. So, that's not entirely new, but I think with the changes, the increase in perhaps the number of collaboration spaces, just the greater number of maybe, audio devices and video devices that are going to be added to these facilities, certainly there's going to be a lot more AV equipment sitting on that network. And there's certainly going to be a lot more media over that network. And so therefore, we're starting to, definitely gain the benefits of the flexibility of the network. But at the same time, we need to be cognizant that, utilization of the network also exposes these devices to a greater risk, a cyber risk. In terms of, from a cybersecurity, kind of vernacular, this is referred to as an increase to the attack surface. So, something that we need to be cognizant of as an AV community. Again, you can't sort of turn on the news today without sort of seeing more and more of these incidents happening, and they're happening at a much higher scale. I think the increase in cyber attacks has increased by 300%. There are reports stating that there are, literally trillions of dollars in losses now being seen by organizations from small to large. And the level and sophistication of these attacks and these groups and organizations that are behind them, is becoming quite sophisticated, and something that should be, of concern for, literally every organization and every vertical and market. The way to look at cybersecurity is really, we need to look at it as a team effort. So, it is our AV community needs to take it seriously, but we also need to work together. Certainly AV vendors are going to be extremely important in this, shift to a more, focused cybersecurity environment. Looking at cyber features and adding security to their products is a very important thing for our, vendor community to put on their roadmaps. And then working with the integration and customer teams to be able to provide instructions on how to properly set these devices up and how to secure them. Integration teams that are deploying these systems, they're, obviously going to need to become better versed and more well versed at how to set these products up and put them in a secure state, right? So that we're removing any vulnerabilities or any gaps in our security, so that we don't let, anything sort of get into the systems that could be disruptive. And then obviously the ongoing operations of these environments. And cybersecurity needs to be thought of as a day-to-day activity versus a kind of a punch list activity. So it's not something that we should look at as we've set the system up and we've checked its security, and now let's go ahead and run it for the next few years. Cybersecurity is a continuous practice. So I think it's something that needs to be practiced on a daily basis, and it needs to be part of our environment and our, in our kind of conversations moving forward. So another aspect of that is certainly there are tools that can be employed. And certainly when you look at enterprise IT, there are a plethora of tools that are being implemented. Now, those tools are definitely being geared towards those types of enterprise environments. And what's unique about AV is the types of devices, the types of operating systems, the lack of security in general, the sort of absence of any type of monitoring agent, makes these AV environments difficult or challenging for the standard cyber tools to really tackle. So as an example, our company, Highcliffe, is focused at, providing tools that can, with a specific knowledge about AV environments, the devices, the media that they produce, and really helping manage and sort of, try to eliminate vulnerabilities and, sort of take care of these confidential media, that we're seeing on the network. And sort of leave it at sort of this slide, but when we think about cybersecurity in general, and I'm assuming my fellow presenters are going to kind of talk about this, really, it's looked at from what's called the CIA triad perspective. So there's the confidentiality factor. So we need to consider, the confidentiality of these systems. And as I mentioned, more and more of these conversations and meetings that we're having using these types of AV environments are certainly going to be, confidential in nature, a lot of them. So, there are going to be organizations that are going to be saying, presenting material that they don't necessarily want others within that organization, or certainly outside of that organization, not having access to. So that's first and foremost. Integrity is very important as well, protecting the content. So that's, looking at better practices of encryption and entropy for the data, making sure that in flight over the network, it's protected. And then availability. And availability is obviously key in making sure that these systems are always up and available, and that, again, by looking to patch vulnerabilities and looking at the latest operating systems and things, we make sure that there are no possibilities for these cyber attacks to cause types of disruptions that could impact the overall organization and be very costly at the same time. So that's sort of my 10 minutes, but yes, again, if you wanted to learn more, please contact me. My LinkedIn, by LinkedIn, Marcella shared that before, but please look me up or visit our website, and I'd be happy to discuss these topics in greater depth.
That's a great presentation. Thanks very much, Jamie. I was really interested in your triangle of cybersecurity. I must say that's a really useful model. And as for cybersecurity being a matter of continual improvement, I couldn't agree more. We're now going to go to my colleague Benedict, but I'm sure that we'll return to those models because they're extremely useful in the panel discussion. Benedict, the floor is yours.
Benedict, your mic is off.
Yeah, sorry about that. So can you all see my screen?
I can't at the moment. Can anyone else? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, can you?
All good.
Okay, cheers. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. My main topic tonight is I wanted to share with you what a normal or a medium to large scale enterprise would factor in when they want to deploy a web app-based collaboration and communication tool. You all are aware that we're living in the pandemic period. Companies and organizations are trying to leverage technology as much as they can to be able to keep afloat, to be able to maintain operations and all that. And so has the bad guys as well upped their game in terms of the threat they bring to valuable information assets. So I stumbled on this bit of data, and I thought I should share with you. This is from CyberEdge. This is from 2020 CDR report, the volume 9. For me, the interesting thing here is when you look at this bit of data, it tries to picture what organizations are able to do in terms of their cybersecurity posture. What have they been able to achieve? If you look at it, this 2021, which is last year, when the COVID hit, let me just reduce this a bit. So the interesting thing for me has to do with laptop and notebooks. You all know that because of remote working, we're all accessing our on-prem network via mostly laptops. Everybody has got a laptop at home, and we're all remote working. So organizations have reported that they from 2020 up until date, that they've been struggling actually with contending with endpoint security issues. Because if you look at the data here, it goes laptop and notebooks is 4.08, and in 2021 that data went down, showing that we are really contending with issues of endpoint security. The one that is quite relevant to my presentation tonight is the is a website and app application. That is a bit quite stable. And I think that is down to the fact that enterprises have found a very good way of managing or appropriating or acquiring web app solutions for their collaboration and communication needs. This is just kind of, I thought I should draw attention to this data because a lot of people have spoken today or have been speaking with, have been making this point about how the threat landscape has actually been declining. So I thought I should share this. So the next slide I have here has to do with my take on what actually happens, from an end user point of view, when an organization decides to go and acquire a new solution, a new SaaS collaboration, SaaS-based, web accessible collaboration and communication solution. So I've just tried to capture the steps, ideally, what happens especially from an information security point of view. Two things I want to mention. This is information security point of view, not necessarily cyber security, because I wanted us to factor in the fact that we all always, emphasize cyber security, which is fair enough because we're talking about AV and so on. But I think the conversation has to go beyond that. It has to also involve a wholesome, information security as a whole, which will involve physical security, which involve many other things, awareness and so on and so forth. So I thought I should mention this. So because I haven't got much time, this slide here, if you can see, I highlighted the cybersecurity triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Is always relevant whenever we're talking about information security, because confidentiality, is key, that only authorized people have access to our information assets, no matter what it is. If an organization values their information assets, they need to make sure that only authorized people have got access. So there has to be confidentiality. Then integrity is whenever through the life cycle of the information asset, whatever information is at rest or is in transit, there has to be integrity. It has to be what it says it is. There shouldn't be any loopholes. There shouldn't be any openings for the bad guys to kind of take advantage or change the information or even listen to the information. It has to be the way it is. And then I have to mention, and then availability. Availability is important because despite the fact that we want to secure our assets, it needs to be available for it to be useful, and it should only be available to relevant people, to approved people, not just availability for the sake of it. It has to be available to people that actually need to access that information. So I just said I have to highlight that. So first of all, if you can see the red box, by the way, this whole process is still within an organization's change management framework. It's still within a robust change management framework. If you see the first box here, project security risk management, what I have noticed is that risk management is key to cybersecurity or information security. So a responsible organization would kick off the whole process of acquiring a solution for communication and collaboration by organizing this hub. I call it a hub. It's the hub that holds everything together. The first point of call is establishing a space, establishing a tool for project security risk management. This tool is very, very important in so many ways. It's where you actually analyze the security terrain to understand the threats that are there relative to the solution you're trying to procure. It's also there as well as a repository for all information or all risk assessment or all activities that have to do with risk assessment. It's also there for audit purposes, so that because organizations run cybersecurity or information security processes based on policies, so it's also there as an audit space where anybody from the organization can go and actually check and see what has been happening with this appropriation or this procurement. What has happened? Who has been involved? What risk analysis has gone on, and what other things have gone on in this whole process. So this is a very, very key part of the whole process. So when this is established, obviously you have to select people in the organization that are relevant or that have got capacity for information security. You have to select people from network security to cloud security and so on and so forth. Everybody fits into this particular pot. Everybody, that's the rallying point for everything. When that is established, and assuming the scenario is the company wants to get this solution, but they are going through an RFP process, for instance. They're going through an RFP process. So when this is established, they scan the market to understand the products out there in the market and compare and research more on the products and see what are the current vulnerabilities that are there in the market for a collaboration solution, for instance. What are the issues, in terms of software, in terms of successful cyber attacks? What is there in the air? So when they must have finished that, they must have an idea of what they tend to expect in terms of threats from this solution they are trying to appropriate. Then they make a decision to say, okay, the next stage, they make a decision to say, is this threat model or what we see in the market, is it tolerable? Is it within our tolerance? Can we handle it? Because different organizations have got different tolerance levels depending on how valuable your assets are, to yourself. It might be okay with one company to look away or ignore certain things, but some other companies might value some other aspects of information assets. Maybe they process large volumes of customer information, and they're quite keen on what happens to customer data or what happens to things like that. So it's down to the organization to decide what they want. So when the threat model decision is made, if they feel that it's not within tolerance, the whole cycle goes back to the whole cycle goes back to the sorry. Just like this a bit. So the whole cycle goes back to this security management space for more security analysis, for more research, for more understanding of what's happening. If it goes yes, we're fine. I mean, we've seen that in the market, there's no much hassle with this. I mean, it's within our tolerance. We can always handle it. Another key role that this project security risk management space does is control, countermeasures as well. It's not only about analyzing security. That is where the countermeasures decisions are made. We can handle it or we cannot handle it. Look at the countermeasure that we can have in place. We need to ask this company or these companies for their roadmap on this particular threat that we've noticed. This is where it's been dealt with. But if the organization decides to move on beyond the threat model stage, then they go for the RFP questionnaires. The RFP questionnaire stage is as well as coming up with the functional requirements for the solution they are trying to appropriate. This is also where the key security functions come in to make their input to the requirements, to define what they want a solution to have, what capabilities, what resilience, what kind of security tools they want that solution to have. And that is where they talk about your capacity to support VPN, single sign-on, encryption, and so on and so forth. This is where that is done. When they denounce this, after these RFP requirements, of course, the RFP goes into the market the vendors respond to the RFP with their different answers to the RFP, including security and functional requirements, and is all assessed and weighed by relevant parties, including the security team, as well as the people, the end users themselves. It might be the department, it might be the marketing department, any other department that will be leveraging the solution. Everybody makes a decision, on where we are going with this. Are we actually going with this? It might be okay from a functional point of view, but if it's not okay from a security point of view, it might not fly. So this is how it's handled. But moving on, if the decision is to say that, oh, we've analyzed like 6 vendors and we made a call that this particular vendor has got all it takes for now, then the decision is made to go ahead with that vendor.
Okay, Benedict, you need to wind up a little because we've got 2 other panelists who are dying to speak. So just wind up and then we can get on to the panel discussion.
Okay, fair enough. So after that stage, of course, you get the architectural review board that will still have a look at it and so on and so forth. Proof of concept happens. If the proof of concept is going live, of course, effective communication and training is very, very key, because in the end, humans are the weakest link to cybersecurity. So it's important that effective communication happens, as well as people are trained up on how to use the solution when the solution goes live. I've just got this slide again. Sorry, I've got this slide again that tries to highlight the relevant cybersecurity domains that should be factored in or should be considered when you're trying to procure an application-based communication tool. Then the known vulnerabilities with that kind of solution, as well as the information security standards that are relevant as well.
Okay, I think we'll have to bring in the others now, but I mean, it's obviously this is all being recorded. So hopefully your slides will be in there as well, and they'll be on demand. But I mean, Benedict, thank you very much. I did think it was interesting the way that you followed through from Jamie, because obviously that dovetails directly into what he was saying as well. So I'm going to go on to Matthew, if that's okay. Matthew, are you ready to take the floor, so to speak?
For sure. Let me just share my slides. Can everyone see my slides okay? Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I'd love to know, for those that are attending, if anyone's involved with virtual events, specifically webcasting. I spent a great deal of time in the integrated installed space, but I'm also heavily involved with virtual events and webcasting. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some areas in respect to security within the virtual event world. So I've come up with 3 pillars within content and media security specific to virtual events and webcasting. So the first one is know your audience. The second one is always encrypt and secure. It's the best practice. And the third pillar is assess, monitor, and log. So we look at KYA, know your audience. You should always consider who is attending your event or meeting. The security controls you put in place may differ depending on the audience and your business requirements. And I've created these 3 different profiles as an example. You may have fewer or more profiles depending on your specific requirements, but the ones that I came up with are public events, private internal, and private confidential. So when you're having a virtual event like the one we're on today, or a large webcast for a company you work with, you need to ask questions to yourself to determine what is the best security posture for that event. So the first one under public event, so are the participants known, or is the event open to anyone? You need to keep in mind, who the audience is and how they're going to interact with the event. How well do you trust those people that are going to be joining? Have they joined via registration platform? What is that trust relationship between you and them? So if the event is public and open to anyone, you always need to consider a higher level of security and potentially, a reduced feature set. Now, it's good we're all in the AV community in this meeting, and no one's going to say anything bad. But when you're, producing a virtual event for a large organization or a large company, you never know what someone might put in an open chat window, right? So you always want to consider moderated Q&A as an example. The other thing I frequently see with a lot of events are, shared links or passwords. remember, anytime you have a link that can be opened by anyone without any sort of authentication or trust, it can be shared. And that's the same with a password. I've often seen webcasting providers, offer a shared password. So it's always, something very simple like, event or password. Well, that can be shared just as easily as that shared a link. So really, there's not a lot of security to be gained by doing that. The other type of events are private internal events where the sensitivity might just be of kind of an internal nature. So anyone in the company can know that. So this is where you should consider things. I know Benedict mentioned this in his slides, things like SSO SAML as an example. So SSO SAML is great. Most companies have some sort of identity and access management solution with their environment. And if you can tie into that, it just creates more trust with the people that are joining that event. The other thing you can look at are things like geography or IP restrictions. So for example, I noticed there's quite a few people on this call, from coast to coast within Canada. So welcome, thank you for joining. But if I was going to have a virtual event, I could potentially, depending on the platform, put in a geo restriction where only people from Canada can join. Just, adding a layer of security to your event. Another one that's become common in a number of different tools is the ability to lock a meeting. So if you're the host of the meeting and you know everyone that's in it, consider locking it afterwards so other people can't join after the fact. The other one to consider is 2FA or MFA. So I think everyone's probably familiar with what multi-factor authentication is. This is when you join a website or log into a website and you enter your login and password, and then you're prompted to add another token or ID, which is usually sent via SMS or an email message. It's just another way of just validating who you are and creating that trust relationship. And then the third is a private confidential event. So consider all the other options that are available and just, add those additional layers of security. I think it's important to keep in mind that with anything, not just virtual events, installed integrated AV, it's not just doing one thing. It's not just, changing the default password. It's, adding additional layers of security, right? To make sure that the overall solution end-to-end is secure. So the next pillar is encryption and security. So we should always strive for end-to-end encryption. And this is not just for virtual events like the one we're on today. It's also installed in integrated AV systems. Make sure that just not the last mile is encrypted. What I mean by that is, there's lots of virtual event solutions where it's encrypted from the content delivery network to the actual participant. It's very important to make sure that you're also encrypted between the encoder and that CDN or that webcast ingest point. Because what you don't want to have happen are attacks like a man-in-the-middle type attack. You would never want to say have an AGM or a large event where someone, or a private event where someone is recording it or inserting malicious audio and video. There's a lot of reputational concerns with an attack like that. The other thing you should do for all solutions, not just virtual events, but also installed and integrated AV, document your configurations. So look at things like role-based access control, delineation of duties. So for example, like an installed AV system, if you have a boardroom that's very sensitive, maybe you want a different set of users or admins controlling that room versus your standard meeting room due to the confidentiality levels of what might be discussed in there. Also look at your recording retention settings. So when you're producing a virtual event or deploying a collaboration tool, make sure you understand where those recordings are stored and how they're retained within that system. Default settings, the recordings may stay there for a year. Your company may have retention requirements that go up to 7 or 10 years. So always keep that in mind. The other thing is user permissions. Within security, the least privilege concept should also always be applied. So if a user doesn't need permissions for, say, open chat, then disable that for that user. The other thing to consider is chat and Q&A functionality. That can easily be abused by users, especially in large virtual events. So carefully consider how you configure that. And then also don't forget, especially in kind of the webcasting virtual event space, always check the tools you're using for presenter acquisition. Those can very often be different. Some webcasting tools do not have the ability to bring in presenters. So you may need to use a secondary tool to do that. So don't forget about the security posture of that tool as well. The other thing I mentioned, when you are encoding for a webcasting provider, always use RTMPS or SRT when you can. If you're not familiar with SRT, it's a relatively new open source standard. It provides a lot of advantages over RTMPS. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is that SRT is very new, so your software and hardware encoders may not support it this time. But you should always encrypt. And often people ask me, well, why do we need to encrypt that? It's a lot of additional work. It's very similar to why HTTPS is important versus HTTP. It's just another layer of security and kind of the security onion. So important thing to consider. And then the third pillar that you should always look at is assess, monitor, and log. So always ensure you understand the security posture of your webcast provider, your installed AV system, your SaaS solution, whatever it happens to be. If you look up NIST online, if you just Google NIST frameworks, there's a lot of valuable resources available from NIST that you can use to help you with this. The other really important tool, and Benedict mentioned this, is around threat risk assessments. So TRAs are great to look at for any solution, and not just new solutions that you're bringing on. And as Jamie mentioned, looking at security as a daily practice. And if you haven't done a threat risk assessment, and you're using a tool, it's always a good idea to just go back and look at it, make sure you really understand the controls that are in place and the provider's security posture. And I mentioned reputational risk, so ensure that you KYA, know your audience, and monitor events appropriately. The best practice is always be monitoring what your audience is viewing, not just the stream you are sending to your virtual event platform. You want to always avoid those man-in-the-middle type attacks if, for instance, you're not encrypting the event. For public events, always consider using moderation features. I think we've seen countless examples since the start of COVID and before with events where things have not gone well because the moderation features, the configuration have not been applied properly. So make sure you're always considering that. Then always make sure you're logging, and this is not only for conferencing tools or webcast platforms, but also installed and integrated AV. If there is ever a security incident, it's a really good idea to make sure that logging is on, that you have logs, so you can go back and look at exactly what happened. Now, there's lots of ways that a bad actor can hide their identity, but this is just a good practice, and it also helps with any sort of troubleshooting you might have to do after the fact. And then lastly, especially the virtual event space, understand how you're going to post an event recording and what security controls you need in place to restrict that access after the event. Often it's forgotten if you need to password protect it or need to host it in a secure location. You always want to consider that. And I want to leave you with one thought on security. Security is not a point in time, like mentioned by the other presenters. It's a constant effort to be looking at the security posture of all your systems. I think we've all seen the news with the different security incidents that have been happening, especially in the United States recently. Security is constantly evolving. It's changing minute by minute. It's really a team effort, and it's really something that you really need to get into the security mindset and just always keep improving your posture overall. Thank you.
That was absolutely great. Thank you, Matthew. I'm sure you're all brimming with questions, but unfortunately we're getting a little bit short of time. So I'm going to go on to our last speaker, Mike, immediately, and then we can go on to some questions. Mike, please take it away.
Thank you. And do you all have vision of my PowerPoint? Yes?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
We've been hacked.
Well,
There we go.
Are you able to see now my desktop?
Yes, see your desktop now.
Okay, let's try that. I love it when a plan comes together. Are you able to see it now?
Yes, can you make it full screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, are you able to see us now? Are we live? All right. Well, first off, I want to thank Deborah for the introduction, and I want to thank Marcella and AVIXA for the opportunity to share very briefly. I'm going to be bringing this presentation from the perspective of an AV integrator with gray hair, plus 25 years as an AV integration company owner and another 10 years as a AV enterprise salesperson. I'm going to present from the standpoint of our responsibilities as an AV integrator as it relates to cybersecurity. Not really time to take a deep dive. My reality coming from the early days of AV when it was 2 slide projectors and mixing that with sound to today has covered a lot of ground. But one thing for sure, we have some responsibilities today that were not part of our past. I'm going to speak directed at how AV and IT have already been fully converged, maybe not in every single company's departments and stuff, but certainly the AV equipment, our role and responsibility, and our values conveyed. Today, it's no secret that especially if you're living in the US and living in the Southeast, you are experiencing gas shortages as a result of a cyber hack. And the reality is it's not a matter of if, but when there's going to be some challenge that either you come across personally or that you come across as a company. 10 to 15 years ago, we were still talking about AV and IT being converged. Today, they're fully merged, and they are that. And so much of what we do in the AV world is integrated with cloud communication, which requires access to the internet, and addressing security within the AV deployments. It's no longer an option. We absolutely have to engage that as part of our conversation. So what is our responsibility? The very first one, and if I could suggest to you the one that sometimes brings the most discomfort, shouldn't, but it does, and that is to ask early when you are brought into an audio-visual systems integration opportunity to speak with the IT team, to have them integral of the discussions from the very get-go, letting them know that you are very, very sensitive to the reality that the AV that we're talking about is going to set on their network. And to do that, which is also a challenge with many of our AV integration friends, is we've got to learn to speak their language. We can't go in there and, we can't go in there and embarrass ourselves by not being able to know what a subLAN is, or to know some basic terminology. So that takes discipline on this part of an AV integrator, and we have to do that. We're there to make sure that we enhance their cyber posture and not create additional vulnerabilities. Our AV equipment is inherently susceptible to cyber attacks, and yes, we could introduce something that without the proper preposition, preparing, that could cause harm to our customers. So what is our value conveyed? Well, let's start off with the very first one. As AV integrators, we don't sell boxes. We sell value. Anybody can sell boxes. So along with that comes, well, what is our value proposition? Well, I like to reflect that it's what we know, not what we sell. And a part of that is going to be a proactive position and selling and positioning ourselves in the world of cybersecurity. We can no longer ignore the fact that AV infrastructure is inherently vulnerable. 10 or 15 years ago, when we started talking about setting our AV equipment on the network, and now AV over IP, everything, it was more about being able to get it in the proper format, being able to understand the technical elements, but it was not a part of many people's conversation to think about the element of cyber exposure. Well, today we cannot ignore that. It is our responsibility to bring that to the surface and to convey that along with the information about the project design and everything, and offer them solutions. And Jamie was speaking about solutions that from his perspective, and today we don't have time to dive into all the various ways, but it's a layered approach. It is no longer just a firewall. Let's look at some of the things that we must recognize, and then I'll turn it back over to Deborah for questions, because my fellow panel members have presented such great information that certainly will sponsor many questions. There's an exponential level of threats. They're very real. It's no longer the world of one person sitting in a basement in a PC and attacking one business at a time. It's an automated process by the thousands every single minute, and it is worldwide, and we cannot ignore that. Hackers are no longer just that person in the basement. They use things like VLAN and subnet hopping from malicious actors are very common. If you don't know what those are, I'm not here to embarrass anybody, or not here to jump into IT education. But these are absolutely tools that are being used today to penetrate through our AV set aside VLANs to get to other valuable assets. We can't ignore that. Firewalls can't keep up by themselves. Now, there's some really great firewalls. This is not a reflection against firewalls, but firewalls are being challenged to keep up because the attackers are no longer just using, they're using IP addresses that are changing all the time, and they're not coming from just one location and not just one at a time. All equipment, AV equipment, we cannot assume that our AV equipment has no vulnerabilities. We need to ask that question of our manufacturers, and we need to convey that information as a part of our system design. And if you're uncomfortable bringing that conversation into a customer discussion, you're going to need to dive deep into some education on the IT side, so that when the IT guy is sitting or lady sitting across the table from you, that you don't embarrass yourself. Security is a layered approach, and it will require you to understand there's different layers and provide their support.
And
Deborah,
that leads me into, sorry to interrupt. I can see you're winding up, Mike.
Yeah, I'm done.
That leads me into asking the first question, really, and that is, how can the integrators play their role in this? We must have lots and lots of integrators sitting on this webinar, and I'd like to know how they're pivotal to it, because obviously they can talk to the IT people. They're AV literate. They talk to manufacturers. They talk to end users. How can they play this part in educating our clients, in identifying weak spots in those solutions in those processes that you particularly outlined? I'd like to ask Jamie first, and then possibly Matthew. Can you tell us, as a vendor, Jamie, how you think an integrator can help on that score?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of pointed it out. It kind of is a mission of education. So the vendor, the various vendors, whatever technology they're supplying, they need to make sure that security is at the forefront of their feature set. They need to be able to effectively communicate that to the integration team, so that they can then carry that forward and make sure that product is set up as per the manufacturer's recommended state. So it is a process of education from vendor to integrator, so that the product can be set up properly for the client. So that's, yeah.
And Matthew, would you agree with that?
For sure, security is a journey, right? And we're all involved in that journey. So, we all need to make sure that we take security very seriously. And it's, I think it's to everyone's benefits, both the manufacturers and the integrators, that, they're very kind of security focused and security first. And make sure that, when you're working with your end users, that you really understand what are their requirements, and always err on the side of caution. Really, it's a team effort, to make sure that the security is implemented properly.
And I was going to, moving on from that, I was going to say, obviously, once you've got the integrator involved, how would you scale up projects and keep security at the top of that list? Because obviously you've got so many more endpoints, as you say, during the pandemic, we've got lots of people moving more, working more remotely. We've got people, companies who maybe can't afford to kit out that 40,000 end users, that people bring their own devices. We've got lots and lots of other vulnerable points. How would you scale up safely, and how does the integrator play their part in that? I mean, Benedict, Mike, would you be able to answer those points?
Benedict, go ahead. Yes, I've got a comment. Go ahead, Benedict.
Yeah, I think the solution provider, the integrator, has a big responsibility as well. It makes sense to understand what your customers' security policy is. It's very important. I mean, gone are the days when you just provide the solution and you just walk away. You need to actually talk with your customers to know exactly what is their headache. How does their security policy look like? Because if you understand their security policy, you understand what is important to them. As I said before, information assets vary in their importance to different customers. You might assume that this customer you served yesterday, values some kind of, information, and you apply it to the next customer, but that wouldn't, be adequate in this current, climate. You need to actually probe and understand. And is a way to actually show responsibility to your customers as well. When you ask those questions, when you get where their pain points are, then you'll be able to serve them and work with them, collaboratively to secure their information.
And Mike, can you make your comment? Can you match that?
I can't match that. I can't even keep up with this jacket. I'll build on Matthew's comment that AV integration in the cybersecurity world is a journey. It's not one and done. It is, you asked, how do you scale? How do you build with a corporation? How do you continue to be a part? Because for sure, cybersecurity is dynamically changing every day, every hour. So I would suggest to you that the way that we're value and the reality of the way that you build on this is that you tell your customer up front, hey, I'm going to come back in 3 or 6 months, and we're going to talk about where we're at. And we're going to talk about new things that we have learned that cause exposure, and what can we do to prevent those. So I really think that the value here in the process to become a part of scaling, being a part of the team is not to look at this as one and done, but look at this as a journey, to look at this as to tell your customer, hey, I'm not coming back necessarily for a product, sell more products. I'm coming back to make sure that what I recommended, 6 months ago is still protected at the highest level, because, their security is most important.
And how can we be more proactive? Because obviously, there are intelligence tools out there. You can obviously employ techniques that you can discover people sniffing around your networks and that sort of thing. I mean, how important do you think it is to be more proactive? Because there is that temptation with security to wait and see, but obviously things are moving so dramatically, especially since last year. Who would like to answer that?
I mean,
I think,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a constant process of sniffing around yourself, when the bad guys are sniffing around the landscape. There are no short supply of threat landscape information. every day there are many people that are doing the research and publishing information. So it's a constant process of you yourself, the organization themselves, or the even integrator themselves, being equipped and being continuously educating themselves and getting more informed on what's out there, what threats are out there and what countermeasures are being applied, and so on and so forth.
And I was going to just ask Jamie to make a quick comment on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think there has to be a transition away from a sort of momentary scan or a periodic scan to a kind of philosophy behind a continuous monitoring stance, so that you need to, the environment's going to be changing and the threat's going to be changing. So you need to be constantly looking at that. And that's part of the mission of my company is, providing tools specific to the AV environment to provide that level of intel about what's happening. And that can then, go back to the end user and to the integrator to look at things and look at threat levels and look at levels of vulnerability to just make decisions in the future about whether or not that vendor is a good choice for the next project. Are they patching vulnerabilities? Are they at a higher risk than other vendors that maybe offer a similar solution? So yeah, I think, there's certainly a way of reinforcing the environments with tools that kind of help keep their arms around what's happening on a continuous basis.
Well, I can see that we're reaching the end of our power hour. I'm going to hand over to Marcella from AVIXA, but in the meantime, I'd obviously like to thank Jamie, Mike, Matthew, and Benedict for their really marvelous contributions. Thank you very much indeed. I've certainly enjoyed it. And obviously, this webinar will be available after the after we close now. Marcella, if you'd like to tell us about the next one and any other supplementary information, that would be great.
Yes, thank you, Deborah and panelists, and thank you, listeners, for joining us today. This recording will be available on avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days, and your 1 RU credit will be applied to your transcript within 5 to 7 business days. If you have any issues, please contact webinars@avixa.org. A huge thank you to Deborah and guests for providing insights into the importance of security when distributing content. Our next Content Distribution and Media Power Hour is later this month on May 26th. The topic is hardware ROI. The first step in getting the most out of your gear is to evaluate your existing tech to understand what is working and what can be fixed. To register, go to avixa.org/webinars. We hope you've enjoyed, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.